The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Buckingham Palace as Margaret Williams, the palace's senior press secretary, stood before her bathroom mirror, hands trembling slightly as she applied her makeup. Today would be different from any other day in her 20-year career serving the royal family. The weight of the announcement she would deliver to the world pressed heavily on her shoulders, making each breath feel labored and deliberate. Her phone buzzed for the 15th time that morning. Another journalist seeking confirmation of the rumors that had been swirling through London's media circles for weeks. Margaret had become an expert at deflecting questions, offering polite but firm responses that revealed nothing while maintaining the dignity befitting the crown. But, today, the carefully guarded secret would finally be shared with a world that had been watching and waiting. 3 floors above Margaret's modest apartment, Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the royal physician, was conducting her final review of King Charles's medical files. The leather-bound folder contained months of test results, treatment plans, and carefully documented observations that painted a picture no one wanted to see. Charles had been battling his cancer diagnosis with the same quiet determination he had shown throughout his decades of public service, but the latest scans revealed a truth that could no longer be hidden from the public eye. Dr. Hartwell had served the royal family for over a decade, witnessing births, deaths, celebrations, and sorrows that shaped the monarchy. She had delivered difficult news before, but nothing quite like this. The king's condition had taken an unexpected turn during his treatment, and, while his spirit remained unbroken, his body was telling a different story. The medical team had exhausted several treatment options, and, though they remained cautiously optimistic about experimental therapies, the road ahead would be longer and more challenging than anyone had initially hoped. At Clarence House, King Charles himself sat in his favorite armchair, the same one where he had spent countless hours reading to his grandchildren and discussing matters of state with his advisors. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, illuminating the countless books that lined the walls of his private study. These books had been his companions through decades of preparation for the throne, and now they seemed to offer a quiet comfort as he faced the most personal battle of his life. Charles had always been a man of deep reflection, someone who found meaning in the smallest details of life and drew strength from his connection to the natural world. Even now, as his body fought against an invisible enemy, he maintained his daily routine of morning meditation and correspondence with environmental organizations close to his heart. The irony was not lost on him that as he advocated for the health of the planet, his own health had become the subject of international concern and speculation. The king's private secretary, James Morrison, had been working tirelessly to coordinate the day's announcement. Every word of the statement had been carefully crafted, reviewed by legal teams, medical professionals, and senior members of the royal household. The goal was to be transparent with the British people while maintaining the privacy and dignity that the situation demanded. James had served Charles for over 15 years and had never seen his employer face a challenge quite like this one. Queen Camilla had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with thoughts of what the public announcement would mean for their family and for the monarchy as a whole. She had been Charles's strongest supporter throughout his treatment, accompanying him to medical appointments when possible and serving as a bridge between the medical team and the rest of the family. Her own background in healthcare advocacy had prepared her for many things, but nothing quite like watching the man she loved face such uncertainty with grace and determination. The Queen Consort had spent the early morning hours reviewing the schedule of public engagements that would need to be modified or postponed entirely. Each cancelled appearance represented not just a change in the royal calendar, but a missed opportunity to connect with the communities and causes that meant so much to both her and Charles. The weight of disappointing people who had been looking forward to royal visits was something she carried heavily, even as she knew that the king's health had to remain the top priority. Prince William had arrived at the palace before dawn, having driven through the quiet London streets while most of the city still slept. As heir to the throne, he had been briefed on every aspect of his father's condition and the implications for the line of succession. The responsibility he felt was overwhelming at times, but it was tempered by his admiration for the courage and dignity his father continued to display throughout his treatment. William's own experience with loss and public scrutiny had taught him valuable lessons about resilience and the importance of maintaining hope even in the darkest moments. He thought often of his mother, Princess Diana, and how she had faced her own challenges with a combination of vulnerability and strength that had endeared her to people around the world. Now, as he prepared to support his father through this difficult period, William drew upon those memories and the lessons they had taught him about the power of authenticity and human connection. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had spent the morning with their children, carefully explaining that their grandfather was facing health challenges that would require additional medical treatment. She chose her words carefully, wanting to be honest with George, Charlotte, and Louis while also protecting them from unnecessary worry. The children's questions were innocent but profound, reflecting the natural concern that grandchildren feel for a beloved grandfather who had always made time for their stories and adventures. The princess had also been in close contact with other members of the royal family, coordinating support and ensuring that everyone was prepared for the public reaction that would inevitably follow the announcement. Her background in art therapy and child psychology had given her unique insights into how trauma and uncertainty affect families, and she was determined to help her own family navigate this challenge with grace and unity. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense approach and unwavering dedication to duty, had cleared her schedule entirely to be present for the announcement. As Charles's sister, she had watched him prepare for kingship their entire lives, and she had never seen him more determined to fulfill his responsibilities despite personal challenges. Anne's own experience with medical scares had taught her the importance of facing difficult news with courage and practical planning. The Princess Royal had been coordinating with various charities and organizations that would be affected by changes to the royal schedule. Her methodical approach to problem-solving had proven invaluable during this difficult time, as she worked to ensure that the king's health challenges would not derail the important work that the monarchy supported throughout the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Prince Edward and Sophie, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, had been providing quiet support behind the scenes, taking on additional royal duties to help maintain the monarchy's public presence while Charles focused on his treatment. Their own children, Lady Louise and James, had been particularly close to their uncle Charles, and the entire family was grappling with the reality of what the medical news might mean for their beloved patriarch. The Duke and Duchess had also been working closely with the palace's communications team to prepare for the inevitable questions and speculation that would follow the announcement. Their experience with media management had taught them the importance of controlling the narrative while still being responsive to legitimate public interest in the royal family's well-being. Throughout Buckingham Palace, staff members who had served the crown for decades were going about their duties with heavy hearts. Many of them had worked closely with King Charles during his years as Prince of Wales, witnessing his passion for environmental causes, his dedication to charitable work, and his genuine concern for the well-being of all British citizens. The thought of their beloved monarch facing such a serious health challenge was deeply troubling to people who had devoted their careers to supporting the royal family. The palace chefs had been preparing Charles's favorite meals, knowing that maintaining proper nutrition during cancer treatment was crucial for his recovery. The security staff had been discreetly coordinating additional measures to ensure the king's privacy and safety during this vulnerable time. Even the gardeners had been tending to the palace grounds with extra care, knowing how much Charles loved the natural beauty that surrounded his official residence. Margaret Williams took one final look at herself in the mirror before heading to the palace's press room. The statement she would read had been approved at the highest levels and represented a careful balance between transparency and privacy. The British people deserved to know about their monarch's health challenges, but the royal family also needed to maintain some boundaries around the most personal aspects of Charles's medical journey. As she walked through the palace corridors, Margaret reflected on the profound responsibility she carried. The words she spoke would be transmitted around the world within minutes, analyzed by medical experts, political commentators, and royal watchers who had been following the monarchy for decades. Every inflection in her voice would be scrutinized, every pause interpreted for hidden meaning. The press room was already filled with journalists from major news organizations around the world. The unusual timing of the announcement had sparked intense speculation, and the assembled media representatives understood that they were about to receive news of significant importance. Cameras were positioned strategically throughout the room, and broadcast journalists were conducting final equipment checks before the formal announcement began. Dr. Hartwell had been invited to attend the press conference to answer medical questions that fell within appropriate boundaries of patient privacy. Her presence would lend credibility to the announcement while also demonstrating the royal family's commitment to transparency about the king's condition. She had prepared carefully for the types of questions she might face, knowing that her responses would need to be both medically accurate and respectful of the royal family's privacy. The Archbishop of Canterbury had been informed of the announcement and was preparing his own statement of support for the king and the royal family. Religious leaders throughout the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth were being briefed so they could offer appropriate prayers and pastoral care during this challenging time. The spiritual dimension of Charles's journey was something that many people found deeply meaningful, and the Church of England wanted to be prepared to provide comfort and guidance to anyone who sought it. As the clock approached the designated time for the announcement, Margaret Williams entered the press room with a calm exterior that belied the emotional turmoil she felt inside. She had rehearsed her statement countless times, but she knew that actually delivering the news would be one of the most difficult professional challenges of her career. The weight of history seemed to press down upon her shoulders as she approached the podium where so many significant royal announcements had been made over the years. The journalists in the room fell silent as Margaret took her position behind the microphone. Some of them had covered the royal family for decades and had witnessed moments of triumph and tragedy that had shaped the modern monarchy. They understood that they were about to receive news that would have profound implications not just for King Charles and his family, but for the institution of the monarchy itself and for the millions of people around the world who looked to the British royal family for stability and continuity. Margaret cleared her throat and began to speak, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. The words she had rehearsed so many times flowed carefully and deliberately, each sentence carrying the weight of truth that the royal family had decided the world needed to hear. As she spoke, she could see the faces of the assembled journalists registering the gravity of what they were hearing, some taking notes furiously while others simply listened with the focused attention that such news demanded. The announcement would mark the beginning of a new chapter in King Charles's reign, one that would test the resilience of the monarchy and the strength of the bonds between the royal family and the people they served. But it would also demonstrate the power of truth, courage, and hope in the face of life's most difficult challenges. The words had barely left Margaret Williams's lips when the first news alerts began pinging across smartphones throughout London and around the world. Within minutes, the carefully worded statement about King Charles's deteriorating condition during cancer treatment was trending on every major social media platform, shared by millions of people who felt a personal connection to the monarch they had watched evolve from a young prince into a dedicated king. Sarah Thompson, a retired teacher from Yorkshire, was tending to her garden when her neighbor called out over the fence with the news. Sarah's hands, still dirty from planting spring flowers, trembled slightly as she absorbed the information. She had followed the royal family her entire life, attending Jubilee celebrations, watching royal weddings on television, and teaching countless students about the importance of constitutional monarchy in British society. The thought of King Charles facing such uncertainty during what should have been the golden years of his reign brought tears to her eyes. Sarah's immediate instinct was to call her daughter Emma, who lived in London and worked as a nurse at St. Bartholomew's Hospital. Emma answered on the second ring, and Sarah could hear the bustle of the hospital in the background. They talked quietly about what the news might mean, both drawing upon their understanding of cancer treatment from Emma's professional experience. The conversation was filled with hope and worry in equal measure, reflecting the complex emotions that millions of families were experiencing as they processed the royal announcement. In Edinburgh, Thomas MacLeod was conducting a business meeting when his assistant discreetly passed him a note containing the news. As a longtime supporter of the monarchy and someone who had met King Charles during several royal visits to Scotland, Thomas felt a profound sense of personal loss even though the king was still very much alive. The uncertainty surrounding Charles's treatment reminded Thomas of his own father's battle with cancer several years earlier, and the memories of that difficult time came flooding back with unexpected intensity. Thomas excused himself from the meeting and stepped outside into the crisp Scottish air. Edinburgh Castle loomed in the distance, a symbol of the enduring connection between Scotland and the crown that stretched back centuries. Thomas thought about all the times King Charles had visited Scotland, his obvious love for the country, and his deep understanding of Scottish culture and traditions. The possibility that these visits might become less frequent, or might end entirely, felt like losing a cherished friend. Meanwhile, in Cardiff, Dr. Angharad Evans was between patients when she received a text message from her husband containing the news. As a cancer specialist herself, Angharad understood better than most people the challenges that King Charles was facing. She had witnessed countless patients navigate the complex emotions and difficult decisions that accompany cancer treatment, and she knew that even the most privileged patients faced the same fundamental uncertainties about their future. Angharad mind immediately turned to her own patients, many of whom looked to public figures like King Charles for inspiration and hope during their own treatment journeys. She knew that the king's openness about his diagnosis had already helped reduce stigma surrounding cancer and had encouraged many people to seek earlier screening and treatment. Now, his continued transparency about the challenges he was facing would provide a different kind of inspiration for patients who were struggling with setbacks in their own treatment. Across the Irish Sea, in Belfast, Father Michael O'Connor was preparing for evening mass when he heard the news. As a Catholic priest serving in Northern Ireland, Father O'Connor had always admired King Charles's commitment to interfaith dialogue and his efforts to build bridges between different religious communities. The priest immediately began planning to include prayers for the king's recovery in that evening's service, knowing that many of his parishioners, regardless of their political views on the monarchy, would want to offer their support during this difficult time. Father O'Connor reflected on the unique role that the royal family played in bringing people together during times of crisis. He had seen it during the pandemic, during natural disasters, and during moments of national mourning. Now, as King Charles faced his own personal crisis, Father O'Connor witnessed the same spirit of unity and compassion emerging from communities throughout the United Kingdom and Ireland. In London, the reaction was immediate and visible. Outside Buckingham Palace, small groups of people began gathering spontaneously, many carrying flowers and handwritten notes expressing their support for the king and the royal family. The crowd was diverse, including elderly residents who remembered Charles's investiture as Prince of Wales, middle-aged professionals who admired his environmental advocacy, and young families who wanted to teach their children about showing respect and compassion during difficult times. Among the crowd was David Shen, an environmental scientist who had attended several conferences where King Charles had spoken about climate change and sustainable development. David had always been impressed by the depth of the king's knowledge and his genuine passion for protecting the planet for future generations. Standing outside the palace gates, David felt a profound sense of gratitude for Charles's decades of environmental leadership and a deep concern about who would carry forward that mission if the king's health continued to decline. Nearby, elderly couple Robert and Mary Jenkins stood quietly holding hands as they read the messages that others had left at the palace gates. They had been married for 53 years and had followed the royal family through decades of changes and challenges. Robert had served in the military and retained a deep respect for the institution of the monarchy, while Mary had always been touched by the royal family's charitable work and their dedication to serving others. The Jenkins couple remembered watching Charles's wedding to Diana, celebrating his subsequent marriage to Camilla, and witnessing his transformation from a sometimes controversial prince into a respected king. They had seen him weather personal scandals, family tragedies, and public criticism, always emerging with his dignity intact and his commitment to service unwavering. Now, as they left their own flowers at the palace gates, they prayed that he would find the strength to overcome this latest challenge. Social media platforms were flooded with messages of support from people around the world. Hashtags expressing support for King Charles began trending in dozens of languages, as people from former Commonwealth countries, European allies, and nations with no official connection to the British Crown shared their hopes for the king's recovery. The global response demonstrated the unique position that the British royal family occupied in the international imagination, serving as symbols of stability and continuity in an increasingly uncertain world. Among the social media messages were contributions from celebrities, politicians, and public figures who had worked with King Charles on various charitable and environmental initiatives. Musicians who had performed at royal events shared memories of the king's kindness and genuine interest in their work. Environmental activists posted about his decades of advocacy for sustainable development and climate action. Charity leaders wrote about his hands-on involvement in addressing social issues and his ability to bring attention to causes that might otherwise be overlooked. But, perhaps most moving were the messages from ordinary people who had encountered King Charles during royal visits or charitable events. A schoolteacher from Wales wrote about the king's visit to her classroom and his patient answers to her students' questions about monarchy and public service. A veteran from the Falklands War shared his memory of meeting Charles at a remembrance ceremony and being struck by the king's genuine concern for those who had served their country. The international media response was swift and comprehensive. News organizations around the world assigned their best royal correspondents to provide analysis and context for the announcement. Medical experts were consulted to explain the implications of the king's condition, while constitutional scholars discussed the potential impact on the monarchy and the line of succession. In the United States, major television networks interrupted their regular programming to report on the news. American audiences, many of whom had followed the British royal family for decades, expressed genuine concern for King Charles's well-being. The announcement came at a time when many Americans were dealing with their own family members' cancer diagnoses, and the king's situation resonated deeply with people who understood the fear and uncertainty that accompany such news. Canadian Prime Minister's office issued a formal statement expressing the nation's support for King Charles, who serves as Canada's head of state. The statement emphasized the special relationship between Canada and the Crown and assured the King of the prayers and best wishes of all Canadians during this challenging time. Similar statements were issued by governments throughout the Commonwealth, demonstrating the continued relevance and respect for the monarchy in many former British territories. In Australia, where debates about republicanism had been ongoing for decades, the response to King Charles's health news was notably compassionate and unified. Even politicians who favored replacing the monarchy with a republic expressed genuine concern for the king's well-being and acknowledged his contributions to Australian society through his charitable work and environmental advocacy. The Australian media covered the story extensively, with particular attention to the king's many visits to Australia over the years and his obvious affection for the country and its people. Aboriginal leaders, with whom Charles had worked to promote reconciliation and understanding, issued statements expressing their hopes for his recovery and their appreciation for his efforts to address historical injustices. Back in Britain, the Church of England mobilized its extensive network of parishes to offer prayers for the king's recovery. Special services were organized in cathedrals and local churches throughout the country, providing people with opportunities to express their support and seek comfort during this uncertain time. The Archbishop of Canterbury's statement emphasized the power of faith and community support in facing life's greatest challenges, words that resonated with believers and non-believers alike. The economic implications of the king's health announcement were also beginning to be felt. Tourism operators who specialized in royal-themed experiences saw an immediate spike in bookings, as people from around the world sought to visit the places associated with King Charles before his condition potentially worsened. Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and the other royal residences experienced increased visitor numbers as people made pilgrimages to show their support. Charity organizations that enjoyed royal patronage saw an outpouring of donations from people who wanted to support the causes that were important to King Charles. Environmental groups, in particular, received substantial contributions from individuals who saw supporting the king's favored causes as a way of honoring his legacy and continuing his important work regardless of what his health challenges might bring. The Prince's Trust, Charles's flagship charity that had helped thousands of young people over the decades, was overwhelmed with offers of support and volunteers. Staff members worked late into the night responding to inquiries from people who wanted to contribute to the organization's mission of supporting disadvantaged youth. The charity's offices were filled with flowers and cards from beneficiaries who wanted to express their gratitude for the opportunities that the King's organization had provided them. In Scotland, the Dumfries House estate that King Charles had worked so hard to preserve and restore became a pilgrimage site for supporters who wanted to see firsthand one of his greatest conservation achievements. The estate's educational programs and sustainable farming initiatives attracted visitors who were inspired by the king's vision of environmental stewardship and community development. Mental health professionals throughout the United Kingdom reported increased demand for their services as people struggled to process their emotions about the king's health news. For many British citizens, the monarchy represented stability and continuity in their lives, and the uncertainty surrounding King Charles's condition triggered anxiety about broader questions of mortality and change. Support groups for cancer patients and their families saw increased attendance as people sought comfort and advice from others who had faced similar challenges. The king's openness about his diagnosis had already helped many people feel less alone in their own cancer journeys, and now his continued transparency about the difficulties he was facing provided a different kind of solidarity and hope. The evening news broadcasts were dominated by coverage of the public response to the royal announcement. Reporters interviewed people from all walks of life, capturing the genuine emotion and concern that millions of people felt for their monarch. The diversity of responses reflected the complex relationship that modern Britain had with its royal family, but the overwhelming sentiment was one of support, compassion, and hope for the king's recovery. As night fell across the United Kingdom, vigils and prayer services were being organized in communities large and small. Churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples opened their doors to people of all faiths who wanted to pray for King Charles's recovery. The interfaith response reflected the king's own commitment to religious tolerance and his understanding of the diverse spiritual traditions that existed within modern British society. The spontaneous outpouring of support demonstrated that, despite decades of social change and occasional criticism of the monarchy, King Charles had earned the genuine affection and respect of his people. His decades of service, his commitment to charitable causes, and his willingness to address difficult social and environmental issues had created bonds of loyalty and affection that transcended political differences and generational divides. The morning after the announcement found the royal family gathered at Windsor Castle for what would become one of their most important private meetings. The ancient walls of the castle, which had witnessed centuries of royal triumphs and tragedies, seemed to provide a sense of continuity and strength as the family faced the reality of King Charles's medical situation together. Queen Camilla had arrived early, spending time in the private chapel where she found solace and strength through prayer and quiet reflection. Her own experience supporting her first husband through illness had taught her valuable lessons about the importance of maintaining hope while also preparing for difficult realities. She understood that the coming months would test not only Charles's physical strength but the emotional resilience of their entire family. The Queen Consort had been working closely with the palace's medical team to understand every aspect of Charles's treatment plan. Her questions were practical and direct, reflecting her determination to be as helpful as possible during this challenging time. She wanted to know about side effects, dietary requirements, activity limitations, and the realistic timeline for recovery. Her approach was methodical and thorough, characteristics that had served her well in her previous work with health-related charities. Prince William arrived at the castle with Catherine and their 3 children, who had been carefully prepared for what they might learn about their grandfather's condition. The drive from their home had been quiet, with both parents choosing their words carefully as they explained to George, Charlotte, and Louis that Grandpa Charles was facing some serious health challenges but that the entire family would support him through this difficult time. William's mind was racing with thoughts about the constitutional implications of his father's illness. As heir to the throne, he understood that he might need to take on additional responsibilities sooner than anyone had anticipated. The weight of this possibility was overwhelming at times, but it was balanced by his determination to support his father and to honor the legacy of service that had been passed down through generations of his family. Catherine had prepared a care package for King Charles that included some of his favorite homemade biscuits, a selection of books about gardening and environmental conservation, and artwork created by their children specifically for their grandfather. She understood the importance of maintaining normal family traditions even during difficult times, and she wanted Charles to know that he remained central to their family life regardless of his health challenges. Princess Anne had driven up from Gloucestershire, her practical approach to crisis management evident in the detailed notes she had prepared about royal engagements that would need to be redistributed among family members. As the hardest-working member of the royal family in terms of public appearances, Anne understood better than anyone the logistical challenges that Charles's reduced schedule would create. The Princess Royal had also been coordinating with the leaders of various organizations that held Charles as their patron or president. Her communications with these groups had been careful but honest, explaining that while the king remained committed to their work, his personal involvement might need to be modified depending on his treatment schedule and energy levels. Anne's reputation for straightforward communication had served the family well during this delicate period. Prince Edward and Sophie, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, arrived with their own children, Lady Louise and James, who had always enjoyed a close relationship with their Uncle Charles. The teenagers had prepared a photo album documenting their favorite memories with the king, including fishing trips to Scotland, garden tours at Highgrove, and quiet conversations about their academic and personal interests. Sophie had been particularly affected by the news of Charles's condition, having developed a deep appreciation for his kindness and wisdom during her years as a member of the royal family. She remembered how welcoming he had been when she first married Edward, offering guidance and support as she navigated the complexities of royal life. Now, she was determined to provide the same kind of support to him during his time of need. The family meeting took place in the Oak Room, a private space where the royal family had gathered for important discussions throughout Charles's lifetime. The room was filled with personal photographs, inherited furniture, and artwork that reflected the family's history and values. Being surrounded by these familiar objects provided a sense of comfort and continuity as they addressed the uncertainties that lay ahead. King Charles himself appeared more frail than he had just weeks earlier, but his spirit and determination remained strong. He had prepared carefully for this conversation, wanting to be honest with his family about his condition while also reassuring them of his commitment to fighting the disease and continuing his royal duties to whatever extent possible. The king began by thanking each family member for their support and understanding throughout his treatment journey. He acknowledged that the public announcement had been difficult for everyone, but he explained his belief that transparency was essential for maintaining the public's trust and understanding. Charles had always believed in the importance of authentic communication, and he felt that hiding the realities of his condition would ultimately be more harmful than helpful. Dr. Hartwell had been invited to attend part of the family meeting to provide a medical perspective that everyone could understand. Her explanation of Charles's condition was thorough but sensitive, outlining both the challenges and the reasons for continued hope. She emphasized that while the king's cancer had not responded to treatment as well as initially hoped, there were still several therapeutic options available, including some experimental treatments that had shown promise in similar cases. The doctor's presentation included a realistic assessment of what the coming months might look like. There would be periods when Charles felt relatively well and could maintain a modified schedule of public engagements. There would also be times when his treatment would require him to rest and recover, potentially for extended periods. The family needed to prepare for this reality while maintaining hope for the best possible outcomes. William asked detailed questions about the succession planning that might become necessary if his father's condition deteriorated significantly. These conversations were emotionally difficult but constitutionally important, as the monarchy needed to ensure continuity of service regardless of personal circumstances. Charles appreciated his son's willingness to address these challenging topics directly and professionally. The king had been giving considerable thought to the possibility of temporarily delegating some of his constitutional responsibilities to William while retaining his position as monarch. This arrangement would allow him to focus on his health while ensuring that the institution of the monarchy continued to function effectively. The precedent for such arrangements existed in British constitutional history, and Charles felt that this approach would best serve both his family and his subjects. Catherine listened carefully to these discussions while also observing the emotional dynamics within the family. She noticed the way Camilla's hand never strayed far from Charles's, offering comfort through simple physical presence. She saw the determination in William's face as he grappled with responsibilities he had not expected to assume so soon. She observed the quiet strength that Princess Anne brought to practical planning, and the genuine affection that Edward and Sophie showed through their attentive listening and thoughtful questions. The children had been included in age-appropriate portions of the family meeting, with George, Charlotte, and Louis each having opportunities to express their love for their grandfather and to ask questions about his condition. Their innocence and directness brought moments of lightness to an otherwise heavy conversation, reminding the adults of the importance of maintaining hope and finding joy even during difficult times. Young George, as the future king himself, showed a maturity beyond his years as he listened to explanations about his grandfather's illness. His questions were thoughtful and demonstrated his growing understanding of the responsibilities that would eventually be his. Charles felt immense pride in his grandson's thoughtfulness and was reassured about the future of the monarchy under William's eventual leadership and George's distant but inevitable succession. Charlotte's artistic nature led her to suggest creating a special garden at Windsor Castle dedicated to her grandfather's recovery. Her idea sparked enthusiasm among the adults, who recognized the therapeutic value of such a project and its alignment with Charles's lifelong passion for gardening and environmental stewardship. Plans began forming immediately for a healing garden that would serve both practical and symbolic purposes. Louis, the youngest, simply wanted to know when he could next visit his grandfather and whether they could continue their tradition of feeding the ducks at the palace ponds. His straightforward concerns about maintaining their personal relationship touched everyone deeply and reminded them that, beyond all the constitutional and medical complexities, this was fundamentally about a beloved family member facing health challenges. The family also discussed how to handle media attention during Charles's treatment. They wanted to maintain appropriate privacy while also satisfying the legitimate public interest in the king's well-being. A communication strategy was developed that would provide regular but general updates about Charles's condition without revealing specific medical details that should remain private. Camilla spoke eloquently about her role as Charles's primary supporter and advocate throughout his treatment journey. She had reorganized her own schedule to be available for medical appointments and had become an expert in understanding his treatment protocols. Her dedication to his care was evident to everyone in the room, and family members expressed their appreciation for her unwavering commitment during this challenging time. The Queen Consort also addressed the emotional challenges that came with watching someone you love face serious illness. Her honesty about the fear and uncertainty she experienced helped other family members feel comfortable expressing their own concerns and emotions. The conversation became more personal and intimate as family members shared their feelings and offered mutual support. Princess Anne took responsibility for coordinating the redistribution of Charles's official duties among family members. Her systematic approach to this challenge was reassuring to everyone, as they knew that the king's commitments would be honored even if he personally could not fulfill them all. Anne's willingness to take on additional responsibilities was characteristic of her lifelong dedication to duty and service. The family also discussed the importance of maintaining Charles's involvement in causes that were particularly close to his heart. Environmental organizations, interfaith dialogue groups, and youth development programs had been central to his identity for decades, and everyone agreed that his connection to these areas should continue in whatever form his health would allow. Plans were made for rotating family members to accompany Charles to medical appointments, ensuring that he would never face treatment alone while also allowing different family members to stay informed about his progress. This schedule would also provide Camilla with occasional breaks from caregiving responsibilities, acknowledging that supporting someone through cancer treatment requires endurance and self-care. The meeting concluded with a family prayer led by Charles himself, reflecting his deep faith and his belief in the power of spiritual support during difficult times. The prayer encompassed gratitude for their family bonds, hope for healing, and recognition of their responsibility to serve others even while facing personal challenges. The moment was deeply moving and provided a sense of unity and purpose that would sustain them through the uncertain months ahead. As family members began to depart Windsor Castle, there were extended hugs and promises to stay in close contact. The children presented their grandfather with the photo album and artwork they had prepared, bringing smiles and tears to his eyes. These gestures of love and support reminded everyone that, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family united by bonds that transcended their public roles and constitutional responsibilities. The drive back to their respective homes was contemplative for each family member. They carried with them a deeper understanding of Charles's condition, a clearer sense of their own roles in supporting him, and a renewed appreciation for the strength that comes from facing adversity together. The challenges ahead would be significant, but the foundation of love and mutual support established during their time at Windsor Castle would serve them well in the months to come. 6 months had passed since the sobering announcement about King Charles's health condition, and the autumn leaves were beginning to turn golden at Highgrove House, the king's beloved private residence. The changing seasons served as a powerful reminder of the natural cycles of life, death, and renewal that had always provided Charles with comfort and philosophical perspective during challenging times. The experimental treatment protocol that Dr. Hartwell had recommended was showing promising results. While Charles remained weak and required careful management of his energy, recent scans had indicated that the aggressive progression of his cancer had slowed significantly. The medical team remained cautiously optimistic, emphasizing that cancer treatment was often a marathon rather than a sprint, but the initial response to the new therapy had exceeded their most hopeful expectations. King Charles himself had found unexpected sources of strength during his treatment journey. The thousands of letters and cards that arrived daily at Buckingham Palace from well-wishers around the world had touched him deeply. Children's drawings, pressed flowers from palace visitors, and heartfelt messages from cancer survivors had created a tapestry of human compassion that sustained him through his most difficult days. The king had insisted on personally reading as many of these messages as his energy would allow. Queen Camilla often found him in his study late in the evening, glasses perched on his nose as he carefully examined each piece of correspondence. He dictated thank you notes when possible and had instructed his staff to ensure that every message received some form of acknowledgement, understanding that the act of writing to the monarch during illness often represented a significant emotional investment for the sender. One particular letter had affected Charles profoundly. It came from a 12-year-old girl named Emily from Manchester whose own grandfather was battling cancer. She had written to tell the king that watching him continue his royal duties while fighting his illness had given her grandfather hope and determination to keep fighting his own battle. The letter reminded Charles that his public struggle was providing inspiration and comfort to countless families facing similar challenges. Emily's grandfather, Thomas Wright, had indeed drawn strength from following the king's journey through cancer treatment. As a retired factory worker who had never imagined he had anything in common with royalty, Thomas found himself deeply moved by Charles's openness about his fears and his determination to continue serving others despite his personal challenges. Thomas began attending a local cancer support group, something he had previously resisted, because he was inspired by the king's example of facing illness with dignity and community support. The healing garden that Princess Charlotte had suggested was nearing completion at Windsor Castle. The project had evolved into something far more ambitious than originally planned, incorporating sustainable gardening techniques, medicinal plants, and design elements that promoted both physical and spiritual healing. Charles had been intimately involved in every aspect of the garden's creation, finding therapeutic value in the planning process even when he was too weak to participate in the physical work. The garden featured a meditation labyrinth inspired by Charles's studies of different spiritual traditions, surrounded by carefully selected plants that had healing properties according to various cultural traditions. There were sections dedicated to herbs that had been used medicinally for centuries, as well as areas where patients and families dealing with illness could find quiet spaces for reflection and prayer. The project had attracted attention from landscape designers, medical professionals, and spiritual leaders around the world. Plans were already being developed to create similar healing gardens at hospitals and care facilities throughout the United Kingdom, extending Charles's vision of therapeutic gardening to communities that could benefit from such spaces. Prince William had grown into his expanded responsibilities with grace and competence that surprised even his closest supporters. The additional royal duties he had assumed during his father's treatment had required him to develop new diplomatic skills and deepen his understanding of constitutional issues. Catherine had been his constant partner in this evolution, helping him balance his increased public role with his responsibilities as a husband and father. The Prince of Wales had also discovered a passion for the environmental and social justice issues that had long been central to his father's identity. William's approach to these causes was informed by his generation's perspective on climate change and social equality, but it was grounded in the same fundamental commitment to service that had motivated Charles throughout his adult life. William's leadership during his father's illness had earned him newfound respect from political leaders, international diplomats, and the British public. His ability to represent the monarchy with dignity while also bringing fresh energy to royal duties had demonstrated the institution's capacity for renewal and adaptation. This success provided Charles with profound satisfaction and reassurance about the future of the crown. The relationship between father and son had deepened during Charles's illness in ways that neither of them had anticipated. Their regular conversations about constitutional matters, environmental policy, and family concerns had created an intimacy that had sometimes been missing during William's younger years. Charles found himself sharing stories about his own struggles and uncertainties as a young prince, helping William understand that leadership was often about learning from mistakes and growing through challenges. Catherine had emerged as a particularly effective advocate for mental health support during medical crises. Her own experience supporting William while he took on additional responsibilities had given her insight into the stress that families face when dealing with serious illness. She had worked with various organizations to develop resources for families navigating cancer treatment, drawing upon both her academic background in psychology and her personal experience with the royal family's current challenges. The Princess of Wales had also continued her work with children and early childhood development, but now with an added focus on helping young people understand and cope with illness in their families. Her initiatives had included creating age-appropriate materials that explained cancer treatment and supporting schools in addressing students' concerns about sick family members. Princess Anne had fulfilled her promise to coordinate the redistribution of Charles's official duties with characteristic efficiency and grace. She had taken on several patronages that were particularly important to the king, including organizations focused on sustainable agriculture and interfaith dialogue. Her approach to these new responsibilities was thorough and respectful, honoring Charles's vision while bringing her own practical perspective to the work. The Princess Royal had also become an unofficial spokesperson for the family's experience with cancer treatment, using her platform to advocate for better support services for patients and families. Her direct, no-nonsense communication style had proven particularly effective in addressing misconceptions about cancer and encouraging people to seek early detection and treatment. Queen Camilla had proven to be an extraordinary caregiver and advocate throughout Charles's treatment journey. Her background in health-related charitable work had prepared her well for understanding medical terminology and treatment protocols, but nothing could have fully prepared her for the emotional demands of watching someone she loved face such uncertainty. The Queen Consort had maintained her own public duties while also serving as Charles's primary support system, demonstrating remarkable strength and resilience. She had become an eloquent advocate for caregiver support services, recognizing that the families of cancer patients often needed assistance and understanding as much as the patients themselves. Camilla's relationship with Charles's children and grandchildren had also deepened during this challenging period. Her practical approach to crisis management and her unwavering dedication to Charles's well-being had earned the admiration and affection of family members who had sometimes viewed her role in the family with uncertainty. The extended royal family had rallied around Charles in ways that demonstrated the strength of their bonds despite the pressures and scrutiny that came with their public positions. Prince Edward and Sophie had taken on additional responsibilities with enthusiasm and competence, while their children had provided emotional support through regular visits and thoughtful gestures that kept Charles connected to the younger generation. International reaction to Charles's illness and recovery had reinforced the global significance of the British monarchy. Messages of support had arrived from heads of state around the world, many of whom had developed personal relationships with Charles over his decades of public service. The Commonwealth nations had been particularly supportive, with several countries organizing special prayers and ceremonies for the king's recovery. The environmental organizations that had been central to Charles's identity for decades had experienced an unexpected surge in support and activism during his illness. People around the world had chosen to honor the king by supporting causes that mattered to him, resulting in increased funding for climate research, sustainable development projects, and conservation efforts. The Prince's Trust had also benefited from this outpouring of support, receiving donations that would allow the organization to expand its programs for disadvantaged youth. The charity's beneficiaries had organized fundraising events and awareness campaigns, demonstrating their gratitude for the opportunities that Charles's vision had provided them over the years. As Christmas approached, the royal family was preparing for what might be a more subdued but perhaps more meaningful celebration than in previous years. Charles's health had stabilized enough for him to participate in some traditional events, but the family had agreed to modify their usual schedule to accommodate his energy limitations and treatment requirements. The king had specifically requested that the annual Christmas broadcast focus on themes of hope, resilience, and community support during difficult times. He wanted to use his platform to thank the countless people who had provided support during his illness while also encouraging others facing health challenges to maintain hope and seek help from their communities. Preparations for the broadcast had been particularly meaningful for Charles, as he reflected on the ways that his illness had changed his perspective on life, leadership, and service. He had gained a deeper appreciation for the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing relationships and meaningful work. These insights had influenced his approach to royal duties and had deepened his commitment to causes that addressed human suffering and environmental degradation. The king had also been working on a personal memoir that would document his cancer journey and the lessons he had learned about facing adversity with grace and determination. The project had been therapeutic for him, providing an outlet for processing his emotions while also creating a resource that might help others facing similar challenges. Dr. Hartwell continued to monitor Charles's progress carefully, adjusting his treatment protocol as needed while remaining realistic about the long-term challenges he might face. The experimental therapy had provided significant benefits, but cancer treatment was often characterized by periods of improvement followed by new challenges. The medical team remained committed to providing the best possible care while helping the king and his family maintain realistic expectations about his prognosis. The doctor had been impressed by Charles's mental and emotional resilience throughout his treatment. His positive attitude, strong support system, and sense of purpose had contributed significantly to his ability to tolerate difficult treatments and maintain his quality of life. Dr. Hartwell often cited the King's case when speaking to other patients about the importance of hope, community support, and maintaining meaningful activities during cancer treatment. As the year drew to a close, King Charles found himself reflecting on the unexpected gifts that his illness had brought. While he would never have chosen to face cancer, the experience had deepened his relationships with family members, connected him more intimately with his subjects, and reinforced his understanding of life's preciousness and meaning. The king had also gained a new appreciation for the everyday heroes who work in healthcare, support cancer patients and families, and dedicate their lives to caring for others during their most vulnerable moments. His experience as a patient had given him insights into the healthcare system that would inform his royal patronage and advocacy for years to come. Looking toward the future, Charles felt a complex mixture of uncertainty and hope. His cancer would likely remain a factor in his life for years to come, requiring ongoing treatment and careful monitoring. But he had learned that it was possible to live meaningfully and serve others effectively even while facing serious illness. The king's legacy was already being written through the countless lives he had touched during his illness, the organizations that had been strengthened by the support his situation had generated, and the example he had provided of facing adversity with dignity, faith, and determination. Whether his reign would be measured in months or years, Charles had demonstrated that true leadership often emerged most clearly during times of greatest challenge and vulnerability. The healing garden at Windsor Castle stood as a living symbol of hope, renewal, and the possibility of finding beauty and meaning even in the midst of struggle. Like the garden, King Charles's journey through cancer had become something larger than his personal experience, creating spaces for others to find comfort, inspiration, and the strength to face their own challenges with courage and grace.